I don't think there's any Israeli, and I say this for the citizenry as well as the political class, who wants to be risking their life or losing their life in Gaza for the next 20 years as well, even after a ceasefire, just in policing, maintaining security. I think that when Ariel Sharon made his historic withdrawal in 2005, it was done in a very strong sense of we've had enough with this place. We don't want to keep losing Israeli troops to snipers and kidnappers and so on. We just want out. But of course, Egypt doesn't want Gaza. And the Egyptian government's very, very strong insistence since October 2023 that they were not going to allow a flow of refugees into Egypt has made the situation infinitely more complicated.
There is also the notion of what Israel has suffered in terms of world opinion. Now, Israel has always said, been willing to suffer some criticism in order to defend their security.
Yes.
When they had few friends in the UN or in other places other than the United States and a few other countries. But it has never been, I suspect, as deep as it is now because of the suffering that people see because of the hunger that has taken place. Do you agree with that or not?
I agree with it partly, yes. I mean, I think that there have been more dangerous times in Israel's history. I think of 1973, for instance, the oil embargo, which had a real impact economically around the world. I think that the ongoing war in Gaza is undoubtedly tilting what you might call uncommitted public opinion against Israel, by which I mean people who don't have a strong view either way on the conflict, and neither wildly pro-Israel nor wildly pro-Palestinian. But the sort of larger middle seems inevitably to be being influenced. All the polls in America, Europe, and so on show this. And that's obviously because of the pictures coming out daily. I think that there is a considerable misunderstanding and indeed a desire to misunderstand what is happening in Gaza. The biggest problem in Gaza in terms of food distribution is that the UN will not distribute food on the ground and stop Hamas from seizing it. And in the end, it has been Israel and to a great extent America in cooperation left with the responsibility of distributing food in Gaza. And it's not the case, and I've seen this with my own eyes there, that it's not the case that there is not food getting in. The problem is distribution.
But there are people on the ground who suggest that the Israelis have not done everything they could to get the food in the hands of starving people.
Yes, and the two things it's worth saying about that are, firstly, this massive problem of Hamas seizing aid and selling it on to the people or keeping it for themselves. That is a problem in Gaza. Hamas has now very few ways to fund its war machine. That is one of them. But the second thing is, of course, and this comes down to a very, very serious problem that Israel faces now as it has in previous conflicts, is the expectation, and I think actually today and indeed historically, it's a unique expectation. I write about this in my recent book on democracies and death cults. Right. The unique expectation that in a war, Israel should be expected and is expected to provide electricity and other supplies, including food, into the territory that it's fighting in. The Russians are not expected to provide Ukraine with aid or with electricity or with food.
Russians have been criticized for their treatment of political prisoners and
absolutely,
and wartime prisoners.
Absolutely, but it's very strange that in the case of Israel, there are certain expectations of how Israel is meant to perform that I would argue are a triple standard from the way in which any other army is meant to perform. But yes, this issue, whatever you think about it and whatever the misunderstandings and the misportrayals and so on, clearly this is having a massive effect on public opinion, which is one reason why internally in Israel there are so many people saying to Netanyahu, you've got to come to a halt. Whereas his argument is, if we were to do so, we would give Hamas the lifeline at the very moment before the opportunity Your victory.
That's also the argument of some of his allies that people object to in Knesset.
Smotrich, Ben Gvir, and so on.
Exactly. Let me read from you. Bret Stephens had a column today in the New York Times, which you may have seen. I suspect you did. First and most obviously, he begins, the government of Israel needs to rush in abundant quantities and to immediately and undeniably affect food and medicine to the places in Gaza that desperately need them.
I come back to this issue. It's a very banal one, but it's the difficulty of distributing food in a territory where Hamas still has some significant control, and where the UN and other agencies who would normally operate to fulfill this role refuse to fulfill that role, meaning that it's down to Israeli soldiers to do so. I think this is a unique problem. I agree it should be solved. I agree it should be answered because it's in the interests of both Palestinians in Gaza and indeed of Israel and its international reputation to address it.
Do you agree also that Israel should not try to reoccupy Gaza?
Oh, I mean, I think it would be a nightmare. I think it would be a nightmare. As I mentioned earlier, I think that no Israeli wants to I mentioned in On Democracies and Death Cults, I mentioned one moment in the middle of the Gaza Strip in I suppose December 2023, and I was just up from the Shifa compound, the humanitarian corridor that was allowing refugees within Gaza who are not Hamas to move from the north to the south, and I turned to an Israeli colonel that was with me, and I said, being British, I would say, we do small talk. And so I thought of saying, do you come here often? But ended up saying to him, when were you last here? I said, have you been here before? And he looked at me with one of the saddest looks. And he said, I was last here in 2005, tearing family friends from their houses. And now, 18 years later, here I am back again. I don't believe there's any Israeli in the IDF who wants 18 years from now to be back in Gaza. I think some other answer has to be found to the problem. And that, by the way, is why I wasn't uncritical of President Trump when he speculated the other month about trying something radically different, like allowing people who want to leave the war zone to leave. But Gaza is part of an intractable problem. And unfortunately for Israel, it's an intractable problem that the world is obsessed by. The North Cyprus problem is also an intractable problem, but nobody talks about it from one year to the next. And it's by no means a problem for the Turkish government.
Bret Stephens ends his column by saying what you just said. If Netanyahu makes the colossal mistake of trying to reoccupy Gaza for the long term, then no thoughtful person can be pro-Israel without also being against him.
It would depend on the parameters of it happening. As I say, isn't it fascinating that of all of the challenges that Israel has faced since October the 7th and before, the problem of Iran's nuclear facilities has proved to be relatively easy. Right. The problem of taking out Hezbollah's weaponry in the south of Lebanon and its leadership across Lebanon has proved to be miraculous. Not easy, but extraordinary. And it's Gaza that is the insoluble problem. I have heard of, and there has been for a while, speculation there could be a multi-country cooperation in the area, maybe involving the Saudis, the Emiratis, the Israelis and others, to have joint different responsibilities within Gaza. Somebody could be in charge of security and so on. But that plan it seems already to be still far away.
But doesn't it need a ceasefire?
It needs a ceasefire and much more. I mean, if you look at Gaza, it's not because the Israelis have been bombing indiscriminately, but because when you clear house to house in areas that have been very heavily mined, very heavily booby-trapped and so much more, there's hardly an undamaged building that I've seen in Gaza. I cannot see how you would get any international cooperation to rebuild Gaza if the people rebuilding it think this is going to happen again in a year's time or anything more. Obviously, has to be a ceasefire. Otherwise, rebuilding and much more just cannot begin.
Do you think there's a rise in anti-Semitism in the world?
Without a doubt.
And,
Without a doubt.
and is part of that rise because what people are seeing on television?
I actually think it isn't. I think it could be a component, but I would say that that's putting the cart before the horse. I believe that the world's obsession with Israel, Israel's security, Israel's government's actions, its military's actions, betrays something that's latent there already. There is no other country in the world that has, for so many years, suffered such an extraordinary amount of international attention. And there is, of all of the stateless people in the world, or people who don't have states, again, there is no, from one year to the next, major push to give the Kurdish people who do not have a statehood. And the world does not obsess about this question. The Palestinian question is used against the state of Israel as a way to keep demonstrating Israeli iniquity. And I think there are several reasons for that, very deep reasons. In Europe, by the way, it's different in Europe and America, but the left has its own reasons for doing this with Israel. The right now has its own reasons for doing this with Israel. For instance, we now see a rise of right-wing anti-Semitism on the fringes, hopefully at the moment still. But for instance, a dislike of Israel for being what they see as being an ethno-state, which it isn't, but a belief simultaneously that Jews push migration elsewhere, and therefore Israel is uniquely guilty. On the left, there are all sorts of variants of this themselves. But consider the fact that, for instance, in Europe, it is European soft powers like Germany, Sweden, and others that are always the first to accuse Israel of certain crimes. And if you just stand back and you say, why would Europeans be accusing Israel of, for instance, setting up a Warsaw Ghetto-like thing, or a concentration camp, or of committing genocide and much more? I'm afraid I think what we see is people speaking to very, very deep existing prejudices, not just anti-Semitism, but in the case of Europe, as the old joke goes, a rather dark joke, but the Europeans will never forgive the Jews for the Holocaust. And if you can accuse Israel of committing crimes in the 21st century that some European countries committed in the 20th century, then you can kind of drop your own historical guilt. These are very, very deep psychological motivations to accuse Israel of doing things, whether it is doing them or not. And I think that exists already. And as I say, I think that is the very, very deep factors that are causing the rise of anti-Semitism on the political left, the political right, in Western countries, in non-Western countries. And, I don't.
Well, there is within the MAGA movement, various opinions about war per se.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly the Ukrainian war, but also about war in the Middle East.
Yes, and I think that one reason for that is the enormous good luck we have in America, which is America has never been, certainly not for a long time, at any meaningful risk of land invasion. If you extrapolated out what happened to Israel on October the 7th to the US, it would be equivalent to, I think I worked out, it would be equivalent in population terms to 44,000 Americans being killed in one day and 10,000 being taken hostage. And if you ask American public opinion about what they would do in that, I don't believe that Americans, the vast majority of Americans, wouldn't say we'd do anything to retaliate to that. But as with polls,
I don't think anyone, most of the people that have looked at that believe that Israel should have retaliated after October 7th.
Yes. What a lot of people, just to finish that point about America, it's very hard for many Americans to consider what it is like for an invading army, like the invading army of Hamas on the 7th, to roll into your territory. In the same way, it's impossible to conceive of what it is like when Vladimir Putin's tanks are 20 kilometers from your home. I think that is one important factor. And I think the second is, and I've said this for many years, I think I might have said it first during the 2006 Lebanon war, there is a very peculiar thing to do with wars involving Israel, which is the extent to which internationally people force Israel, or the international community forces Israel to some kind of ceasefire before it has been able to achieve its strategic objectives. And as a result, wittingly or unwittingly, the international community sets up the status quo for the next round of the conflict. What I mean by that is, for instance, if Israel had been, as it were, allowed to finish off Hezbollah in Lebanon in 2006, there would not have been an Israel-Hezbollah war again from 2023 until the current day. If it had have been allowed to destroy Hamas in 2010, you would not have had to have had another Hamas-Israel war several times in the succeeding decade. I believe that the demand to return to some kind of status quo ante is a mistake, because my observation, I've said it many times, is that we have a Western presupposition these days that conflicts end by getting around a negotiating table and hammering it out. There are cases when that is true.
Well, there are also people who suggested that one of the issues in the Middle East with Hamas and Hezbollah was the fact that they did not go after sufficiently the head of the snake, in this case, yes, describing Iran.
That's right.
This was the time that, at long last, Iran was attacked by Israel and the United States.
Yes. And that has been, I think now historians will see that what it has been since October 7th has been pulling a sort of weave from a rug slowly until you can pull the whole thing out. And the thing at the end was always the government in Tehran, which has been funding these proxies of Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, and so on. That was the ultimate goal. But then, as I say, just to finish the point, I think that it's important to just bear in mind that historically most wars end not because of a negotiated settlement, but because one side wins and one side loses. And Israel can never afford one major loss.
Some of those European countries are stepping forward to support a Palestinian state.
Yes, inevitably. It's the president of France has suggested this. It seems that the sort of
the Chancellor of Germany, I think, as well.
I think he's gone close to it. Has he? Fully?
Yeah, exactly.
And Keir Starmer in the UK is threatening to do it. It's of little importance in a way, because I think the era in which France or Britain have the gift to create states in the Middle East is long past. Right. And neither Emmanuel Macron nor Keir Starmer seem to realize that. But they could all unilaterally declare that there should be a Palestinian state, and it will make not a darn bit of difference to the creation of a Palestinian state, because nobody can answer how the PA in the West Bank and the ruling of Gaza can be done. Even if you were to do land swaps in the West Bank, no one can solve this problem. And unfortunately, we have some very stupid politicians in all of these countries. This is way beyond them. I mean, this would be way beyond this. Maybe Henry Kissinger and Thomas Jefferson and a couple of others could solve this problem. But I do not believe David Lammy in the UK or Chancellor Merz in Germany can solve this problem.
It's 2025. America's debt is over $37 trillion, and the dollar just had its worst crash since 1973. That puts your savings and your family's future at risk. That's why we trust Alpha Omega Gold, a company that stands unapologetically with Israel and supports Stand Tall Israel. Visit ao.gold/stand to claim your free precious metals wayfinder guide, or call 1-855-426-4653 today. protect your future before it's too late.